And that's where we'll take a break for today, friends and family. Hopefully, Marissa and I have inspired you to go practice some yoga and grab yourself a feedback sandwich. Be sure to join us back here for the conclusion of this two-part episode with Marisa Murray. We'll pick up where we left off, and we'll also spend some time going through several of the key categories of blind spots captured in Marissa's book. Until then, remember, Dad may not always know what he's talking about, but he sure can sound like he does. Welcome back to part two of our interview with Marisa Murray, discussing her book, Blind Spots. If you missed the first episode with Marissa, you know the drill by now. Go back and check it out and join us back here once you have. And now back to our conversation with Marissa.
You know, when I was your age, go ask your mother. I know you don't like it. It builds character. How many times do I have to tell you? I'm not just talking to hear my own voice.
Hello, listener, and welcome to Dadages. I'm your host, Chad Hagel. And if you are looking for some fatherly wisdom for your career, your family, or any other aspect of your life, then you've come to the right place. If you want to learn more about Dadages, find additional content, submit questions, or feedback to me, visit dadages.com. Thanks for being here. And before you listen to our podcast, please listen to your father. Dadages, friends and family, I hope you got as much as I did out of the first half of our time with Marisa Murray. I'll remind you that the dadage we're discussing is all about competitive advantage. You don't have to be the best in the world to succeed. You just have to be the best version of you. We've been sharing time with Marissa looking at this dadage through the lens of her book, Blind Spots. We've talked about a couple of the blind spots she has identified in her book, and today we'll continue right where we left off and get into some more examples of blind spots in leadership and learn more about Marissa as well. Let's get back to that right now. And I'd like to, turn the mirror back to you for a moment, Marissa. I'd like to understand a little bit more about you. You talked about hitting this sort of semi-crisis moment when you were at Bell, and you talked about having blind spots. Were some of those blind spots that you were contending with outdated core beliefs on your part? And can you trace them back to where they might have come from in your life that led you to that moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the one that I can really trace back is the sort of, I can only describe it as the drive for recognition. I never really thought that that's what that was. I was like a hyperachiever, high achiever, but I can trace it back to grade school. I just, you go to school, you get good marks, you get an ice cream because you got 100 on a test, and my parents were wonderful parents, but there's this incentive structure that, reinforces, all the way to get into a good school, get a good job, get the promotions, and more remuneration. And so what happened with that is I realized that I was just sort of a recognition chasing monster. Now you get quite senior and it dries up completely.
Yeah, there's nowhere to get recognition from anymore.
Yeah. I mean, you already have, beautiful abundance in every aspect of your life. And so you're kind of like a spoiled child if you want to be incented. Like you're kind of like a spoiled child. And people in the corporate world in particular, they're only just talking about the problems they want you to solve and why you haven't done enough of it. And there's never enough. And what I didn't realize at the time, that was not being filled up by sort of this idea of being recognized, was actually draining a lot of my energy, my motivation, my creativity, all kinds of things. And the switch that I needed to make was to contribution, was that I'm not doing this. I'm here to contribute my intellect, contribute my passion, contribute my vision, contribute my energy to create something that's going to have an impact that I'm really proud of, and, all that kind of stuff. And that switch, had I done that switch earlier, I think the whole orientation with which I was performing my jobs might have been different. The other thing is, when you're recognition seeking, you end up in jobs you don't want. You end up in places that it was just because the carrot, you were following the carrot, as opposed to really listening to kind of how do you want to contribute and grow. So that was a really big shift. And I see that shift being really important for top leaders. I think recognition seeking will get you to mid-management, but beyond that, you have to be very self-actualized. You have to be filled. Now, you still will get some recognition, but it's supposed to feel like, a really beautiful piece of dark chocolate. Like you can't be nutritionally dependent, right, on those things. And, the other thing, I was doing a talk for International Women's Day. And the other trend that I really see with women is even when they get recognition, they tend to fluff it off. Like, you'll be kind of like, your dress is beautiful. And they're like, oh, I got it for $5. Like I don't know why. There's a deflecting mechanism sometimes. And so we further deplete ourselves because we can't fill ourselves up. We don't take it in when we get it. And then we sort of feel this frustration that there's so many demands and pressures on us, and it just doesn't sort of feel fulfilling.
Yeah, it's that hole that just can't be filled. And I loved what you were saying about transitioning from what recognition can I get to how can I contribute to others and help them to achieve more. And then the recognition that I should derive is what I've done to help them along the way, the gratitude for helping others achieve their own accomplishments versus trying to achieve those things for myself. And that actually, to me, triggers an association and a memory, which is very strong in my mind, that goes outside the corporate realm and back to the family environment as well. I remember this instant in time when my first son was born, and it wasn't like an hour or a minute. It was like, boom, the minute my eyes made contact with his, I felt like everything that I had ever wanted for myself, I now wanted for him. And I feel like that's a very powerful and overly dramatic explanation or metaphor for this in corporate or professional environment that you're talking about. But if you can kind of work yourself through that same transition and focus on what you can do for others and take the spotlight off of yourself, it seems like it would really help in that transition that you're talking about.
Yeah, it unleashes so much potential in you and so much scale. Ultimately, practically, you're all of a sudden you're bringing in leverage and scale, and you're enabling, because at one point your leadership matters very little. Sorry, your individual contribution matters very little. It's all about how you elevate everyone else's individual contribution. And that's a really important shift. And it was something that I wasn't conscious of at all. It was pretty buried. It was pretty buried and pretty embedded.
I hear that. And I think that happens to many of us. Let's move on to another one of your key blind spots that I really found interesting. And it's triggers from past pain. One of the things that I'm really fascinated with is, I think, I really spend a lot of time looking into family of origin and formative years and understanding how those earlier things can become triggers for people later in life, because I think that that's one of the aspects where this comes into play. And this treads a little bit more into psychology and the work of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. I was, as a patient, involved in Jungian therapy. My therapist was Jungian at the time that I had one, or Jungian analysis, as it's often called. And it's a really in-depth analytical form of talk therapy that's designed to bring together the conscious and the unconscious parts of the mind to help a person feel more balanced and more whole, more complete. And I think that these psychological principles very much apply to this notion of understanding the impacts of triggers from past pain, because these can be very deep-rooted and serious things and very personal things. I'd like to look at this for a moment through a lens of not what does a leader do to help themselves get through these kinds of things, because I think that is, I wouldn't say straightforward, but the answer there to me is having a coach, having a mentor, having a therapist, and really exploring these things and taking something that's buried in the deep animal parts of the brain and bringing it forward to the intellectual parts of the brain so we can process it. But a lot of people aren't necessarily ready for that. And so what I want to talk about is, if you're a leader and you suspect that a member of your team is suffering from triggers from past pain in a professional context, but despite that leader's attempts to get that team member to open up, to provide some background, some context, so that the leader can help manage the interpersonal dynamics of dealing with this person, not just the logistical dynamics of managing someone through a business task, how would you suggest that a leader handle this kind of circumstance if that team member just simply won't open up or engage at that level?
Well, so I think triggers from past pain can be past trauma, like it can be big, but it can also be little. And I think what we have to always remember is that our brain is an amazing pattern recognizer, and it's always trying to protect us from pain. And it often will make assumptions that the pattern is repeating itself and trigger a defensive or protective response when, the reality is the pattern is not repeating itself at all. And so I think that that can happen in big and little ways. The examples, like one of the case studies in my book, is Mary the marketer. So Mary was an incredible leader, but she had had a few different roles at different companies. And what she discovered through some pain of being passed over by promotions or not recognized or all this kind of stuff is that she had really had to market herself. So many of us hold the false assumption like that we're going to just do good work and it'll be noticed. That's a false assumption too. You do have to create visibility for your work. But Mary had kind of taken it like to an extreme where she was constantly marketing herself. And and she was doing that because of past pain around being missed over and ignored and not getting the credit she needed. But as a result, at this stage, she was kind of on top of the world. She was doing amazing at her job. And it was kind of obnoxious that she was always marketing herself. She'd kind of gotten to that level of the organization where, like, we know you're good. Like, you wouldn't have that job. And yet the trigger from the past pain for her was just this underlying low grade fear, and her brain being like, we're not repeating this pattern. Like, we are going to be acknowledged. So in that case, if these clients often come to me because there's dis-ease somewhere in their interactions, or there's this desire to prepare them for that next level of greatness. And so I find that one of the things I do is I ask them to identify people that they really value their opinions and that are really critical to their success. So I get them to pick the people. And they pick people, and I really say that, like, you really value their opinion and they're critical to your success. And then I interview those people and I come back with the themes from those people. And there's something very powerful about the fact that they really care about these people and they really know they're critical to their success. It provides a lot more resonance to the feedback that they receive. And then I sort of share with them how these behaviors are negatively impacting people that they really care about and people that are critical to their success. Kind of both to give on. And that often provides incentive for people to experiment with shifting those behaviors. And what usually happens as they're shifting their behaviors is they actually start to feel really freed from the fear. They start to kind of realize, like, oh, it was fear. They didn't even realize it was fear, right? Their brains in pattern recognition, and it's very healing for them and it's very freeing for them. So to answer your question, if a leader suspects that someone is kind of being triggered too easily, I do think that it's great to recommend coaching. It's great to recommend getting feedback from people they really care about. I do think we do, pull up our bootstraps a bit for people we care about and people that really we know have our best intentions in mind. And so I try to use a little bit of the ecosystem to incent them to have a look at it.
No, I love that idea. It's such a great suggestion that particularly as a boss, you may not be the right source of trying to provide feedback to somebody because immediately their defenses go up. And if you're sensitized already to negative feedback from others or a sense of low self-esteem or low self-worth or these types of things, you're not going to be able to engage. And likewise, the individual themselves may not be able to engage and get around these blind spots that are confronting and confounding for them. But if you open it up to a group of peers that person already implicitly trusts, now you have outside perspectives, but the outside perspectives are coming from a non-threatening place. I love that. I think it's a great recipe and something that I'm going to put in my toolbox, mentally speaking, and figure out how I can apply that from a management perspective for sure. Well, I wanted to advance to another of your blind spots that I found very, very interesting in reading the book. And that's, and you talked about some of these things we've talked about already. We've talked about the need to evolve. And it's a theme in this blind spot as well, which is mismatched mindsets, that a mindset has to evolve during the course of your career, not just your beliefs or getting past trauma that you've had before. And you talk about 3 areas of focus for your organization leaderly: leading self, leading others, and leading change. Can you explain these to the Dadages friends and family and what they have to do with an evolving mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. So, leading self is all of the skill sets that we need as the individual productive, contributing members of society, right? So we have to be able to be disciplined, be organized, be communication skills, be professional. I mean, there's a whole list of things that we probably underestimate until we watch a teenager try to kind of get themselves into the world and all the skill sets. And so the leading self mindset, often has a lot of just self accountability and integrity, like all those sort of fundamental things around me being the steward of my own behavior. And so that's kind of, the first phase. And without that foundation, you can't get very far. The next step is leading others. And all of a sudden that mindset shift starts to be like, okay, you have to start being clear around a vision. You have to understand the motivators of others. You have to try. So the mindset is a little bit more about the collective, right? Around our collective identity, our collective ambitions, and our collaborations. So there's a lot of skill set developed in terms of, and that sort of starts, there's overlap. Obviously, as you are a team member, you start to get a little bit of those skill sets. You start to develop some of those skill sets. And then as you're leading a team, obviously it becomes more important. And then the third that I talk about is leading change. And what I mean by leading change, it could also mean leading the enterprise, but it's not always the enterprise. The highest form of leadership is that you're actually leading, you're actually changing something, you're going into the unknown. Whereas, an individual performer leading self is probably a little more known, and leading others is a little bit more known. But leading change is like, what is
That's
your
where the
impact?
adventure begins.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a new mindsets around that have to do with being a steward of, like, being thoughtful and having wisdom and being very purpose driven, and also being comfortable with risk, which is often something. So there's all these kind of new, and I always sort of feel bad for my brain, because it's like it doesn't get the memo, right? I'm now in this new role and I'm telling it to do all these new things. I really haven't sort of guided it to what does that mean on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things I talk about in the book is the importance of values. So a lot of people also think that values are kind of stagnant, like I have my values and I live by them, but values actually shift across these different mindsets. A typical value of somebody at the leading self, is reliability, and even maybe like financial stability and, those kinds of things, right? And then a leading others is more around like creating inclusion and respect. But then leading change can be about, taking risks and, more environmental awareness, more global awareness, more future generation oriented. So deciding, I think about what values am I wearing, almost like what clothes am I wearing? I mean, given my role, what values do I kind of have to sit in? And then also understand what values your people are in. Sometimes we say things about, younger generations where it's like, oh, they're so self-interested. Well, you know what? That's exactly what they need to be right now. That's the level.
They're still in the leading self phase.
Exactly. And they need to be that, because they're building their skill set, right? And it's natural. This evolution is quite natural and it's quite necessary. And where we run into trouble as a blind spot is when we're stuck in congruent mindset with the role that we're in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Or have forgotten the mindset that our team members might be in, trying to go back to our own experience when we were their age. And I'm going to show right now how much of a geek I am. When you were talking about leading the enterprise and the adventure of leading change, all I could think about was Star Trek and to boldly go where no one has gone before.
Exactly. Yes, that's fantastic.
So I'm going to jump from Star Trek and I'm going to take us back to yoga again. And I'm going to pose something that's kind of a challenging question for maybe you and me to work our way through, because you talked about this evolution of mindset, and I understand it. I get it in the professional context. But in yoga, one of the principles that you and I hear all the time is maintaining a beginner's mindset, right? Always bringing a beginner's mindset and a learner's mindset to the mat every time we practice. How do we reconcile these notions of the yogic value of always coming in with that fresh beginner's mindset with the notion of an evolutionary mindset over time? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, what I love about the learner's mindset is it actually helps you identify sort of what mindset you should be in, because it's our attachment to our ways of past, our ways of being in the past, that actually run the old patterns. But when people have a learner's mind, just even in their role, and they have a learner's mind, and they become so aware of the actual circumstances that surround them, as opposed to the sort of the perceived circumstances that are actually just driven by the fact that they think it's the pattern that's repeating from their past.
Yeah.
So the
Being truly
learner's mind to
present
me,
in the
yeah,
present.
exactly. I think the learner's mind is what actually gets you to be able to attune your mindset to exactly where you are at this moment, because it's the patterns that cloud our appreciation for the current moment, for the present moment.
Yeah, I love that. Coming to every moment of every day with a fresh perspective allows our perspective to evolve as the minutes and the days and the weeks and the years evolve and go by.
Yeah, all the information is available to us. It's just that oftentimes I always think about my brain as being a bit lazy. Like it just wants to run the pattern. It's built a superhighway. It just wants to run the pattern. And when we go into a learner's mindset, we're telling it, like, we really want you to look for a new neural pathway that we're missing. And it kind of sits there and goes like, really? Because that's going to take a lot of energy. And I'm not sure
I
I
don't
want to
want to
do
do
that. And you have to tell it, like, yeah, you work for me. Like, I'll feed you and water you, but you work for me.
So we have to treat our mind like a teenager, it sounds
A
like.
little bit. Yeah. Or just heal, like a dog.
Well, and speaking of teenagers, I'd like to rewind now. And you have such amazing insights and wisdom that you not only have cultivated through your own experience, but you've managed to package up and deliver to others. If you go back and look at your formative years, what were the influences that you think led you to where you are in the enlightened point that you've arrived at, both personally and professionally? Was it from your family of origin? Was it lessons you learned from your parents? Were there mentors and coaches along the way for you that paved the way? How did all of this come to be? How did you arrive at the Marisa of today?
That's really a super important reflection. I mean, certainly I had incredible childhood. If I had to just sort of describe it, it was, you can do anything you want to do, right? And my dad actually worked for Ford. He was the vice president of Ford, and we used to go to Ford Family Day. And I remember the banner that said, if you think you can, you will. And if you think you can't, you won't, or, that kind of energy. If you think you can, or you think you can't, you will, or whatever. I don't even remember that. I say I remember
Either
it,
way,
but
you're
I remember
right.
this. Either way, you're right. So there was that whole energy of like, just, I guess, a way of sort of appreciating that self-actualization is like yours. It's yours to evolve into.
Such a great place to start from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which was a great place to start. And then from there, I think when you move through the world with this idea of wanting to master things, at the beginning for me, it was technical mastery, and then it became kind of business mastery. And now it's like leadership mastery. You find mentors and teachers and in everything. It's like there's the wisdom of, I always think about us little humans, and then I think about like human colossus, like the combination of all the knowledge of our humanity, like we're one being.
I think
And
about
how,
that sometimes too. I think about humankind
yes,
as an organism
right.
versus each one of us as an organism. It's just, when you say that, it's something that I think about from time to time when I'm geeking out.
Yeah, me too. I geek out. I'm a little cell in this huge, enormous, organism. Sometimes I walk through the city and you just sort of, you walk through the city and you're like, look at all the things that were invented. Like, look at all the collective intelligence of the human species. It's phenomenal. So I think that whole idea of like, me as my individual cell, and then all these helpers, so many helpers throughout my time. So there's innumerable mentors and sponsors and coaches, but also, just experiences. And you bring up yoga a lot in our conversation. I mean, there's ancient wisdom as well that is so relevant and helpful. So I don't know that I could do anything in specific. There is one little story that I do think was also super helpful. And that was, my father used to always bring home very senior executives from Ford. So whenever anyone super senior was in town, he would kind of feel sorry for them that they'd eat in the hotel. So he would bring them over to our house. And I was one of 5 girls, and we would have to get all dressed up, and we'd have to go to the dining room, and my mom would make this incredible meal, and we would have to behave, and we'd have to be polite, and I would have to say grace because I was like cute and young. And I just remember these people being kind of paraded through me. And number one, as a kindergartner, finding them kind of boring and very normal. And And
But there's a
then
great lesson in there, right? No matter how high
yes,
someone
exactly.
elevates themselves in a corporate setting, at the end of the day, they're still just a person at the dinner table.
Exactly. And so I didn't realize how much that helped me in my career because I was never afraid to have a very human conversation with any level of the organization. And as a result, I attracted sponsorship way above where I was. People that just sort of let I just build a relationship with, and they were really pulling me up. And I attribute that to just being exposed to humans being humans, and we're all on this same journey, and we all have our struggles, and and we're just one cell of the human colossus. So I think that was helpful.
I love that story, and such a gift that your father gave to you and your sisters, perhaps unknowingly even, that he was paving that way for you, and just out of the generosity of his heart and hospitality to the guests. I think that's such an amazing story, and it really speaks to something that I hold to, which is, and we actually talked about this in the most recent episode that I referred to with Minda Zetlin, is the idea that I have fully rejected the notion of work-life balance. And I think the two things just come together as life. And I think the story you shared about your family is a great illustration of that. Your work life does not have to take you away from your family life. There are ways to integrate them, and you never know the gifts you could be bestowing upon your colleagues and upon your family by breaking down some of those barriers that our society has kind of erected for us, I think, inappropriately. And so I try to do the same thing with my boys. I want them to see me conducting business. I want them to hear how I talk when I'm talking to business people. I share with them challenges I'm having, struggles I'm having, battles I'm fighting, debates, arguments, lawsuits. I don't want to hide them from any of this stuff because I don't want them to feel like it's foreign or scary. I want them to be aware that this, if you're go on to be a professional, that this is part of life, and to just treat it as commonplace, so that none of those things are intimidating. They're just another chair at the dinner table in your example. And so let's talk about that now. Let's talk about leadership at home. And you and I are both parents, and I absolutely love the dedication of your book. Addressing your two sons, you say, "You raised me while I thought I was raising you." Is there a specific example of how a simple question that came from your boys, as you've talked about, has led to a profound insight for you about your blind spots?
Oh, there was so many. Oh, but I'll just tell you one little story. My youngest son was in the bathtub. He probably was 4 years old, and having a little bubble bath. And he said to me, "Oh, mommy, aren't I lucky to have such an incredible mummy like you?" And I said, "Oh, Theo, aren't I lucky to have such a beautiful boy like you?" And he said, "Yeah, and aren't I lucky to have such an amazing brother?" And I said, "Yeah, and aren't we lucky to have such an amazing daddy?" And then he said, "Well, how come you're mad at him all the time then?"
Gotcha, Mom.
And I said, "Oh, honey, I'm not mad at him. I'm just trying to make him perfect." And he looked me straight in the eye, and he said, "Mom, perfect is not better."
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That
It was
is
just
a wise
precious.
young man right there.
Just precious. And there's these moments. There's another one that's kind of crazy. This was a couple of years ago. I was in a fight. I think my son was 14. We were in some fight in our condo. I don't even remember what the fight was about, but we were both behaving badly, and I had to drive him somewhere. And so we went out in the hall and we got in the elevator. And as soon as the elevator door opened, our neighbor was there. And so, the tension when like people are in a fight and then there's like this. So I start trying to be like, "Oh, hi, Andre."
Suddenly there's a public audience. Yeah, there's an observer.
I know. And so I switch into my neighborly mode, and Andre says hi to Theo and says something like, "Well, how are you doing today?" And he goes, "Actually really bad because my mom is a nutcase," or something. He says something like that. And Andre just says, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." And I kind of chuckle, but I'm like, now I'm doubly mad, right? So
Gritting your teeth, yeah.
So Andre leaves the elevator at the reception. It goes down to the parking garage, and the doors open, and I feel this rage. I'm just rage. And he turned to me and he said, "Mom, you're not allowed to be more mad at me because you think you look like a bad mom. You're already mad at me."
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, it's that desire to look like a good mom that is making me even more mad. That is like another ridiculous, silly. He's like, "We're already mad at each other." So there's just been all these moments where I was like, man, I thought I was raising you.
Such brilliance from your children. It's amazing. And I always say that if you're not learning from your children, you're just simply not paying close enough attention.
Yeah.
I think there's so much wisdom that is embedded in them. And if you want to look at it through a spiritual or religious context, they are closer to God than we are. They have more recently come of the universe into this world. And there's something spiritual there that is embedded within the lives of these precious young human beings.
Yeah, and they're made for the present. You can tell they're fresher. They're made for our time, and so I think that you have to trust it. And yeah, but it's been, every single phase has been of joy and also torment.
It's awesome. And
yeah.
turning from the wisdom that you've gotten from them, how do you sort of right size and package and present to your boys the wisdom that you've picked up along the way in the process of helping to raise them to be fine young men?
Inquiry is so important. I mean, the coaching approach is much less tell and much more ask. And the insights that you can derive from inquiry versus tell are I always kind of blows my mind. And so often with the boys, they will say they are quoting me. And yeah, they'll say, Mom, remember you told me this? And they'll say this really beautiful thing. And I will say to them, it's not possible that I figured out that incredible thing. You have created that incredible thing through your reflections. I feel like, I think we're modeling all the time, where it's our job to sort of help them, put the synopsis together in their own minds. And when they do that, I just find that they're so much more insightful in terms of their own journey and their own needs than we could ever be. I try very hard. Occasionally I fall down. I remember the other night I was like, okay, because people pay me a lot of money for this opinion that I'm about to give you that you're completely going to ignore.
Listen up.
So occasionally I just want to give them some kind of shortcut, and I try, but it never lands the way it lands unless we move through kind of inquiry and them figuring it out for themselves, but with a lot of support. It's not like we just sort of let them we want to let them make mistakes, but I want them to be thoughtful about what they're doing.
That's great perspective and great advice for sure. And I'm sure that the Dadages friends and family really appreciate those insights. And it's clear to me that you're an equally good coach and a mom. So you can assure your son that he doesn't have to worry that you might look like a bad mom, because you come across looking like an excellent mother. And I really value your perspectives. I think they're very wise. This has been an incredible discussion. Before we wrap up today, I know that you've written a few books now. Can you share the other titles with our friends and family and where they might find them?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So they're all on Amazon. And my first book is called Work Smart. And it's basically the 9 core areas that will unlock performance. My second book is called Iterate. And it's about navigating rapidly changing environments, how leaders can navigate through turbulent times. And then, of course, Blind Spots, how great leaders can uncover their blind spots and unlock performance.
Fantastic. And I'm sure, they're all equally powerful in the way that they're structured and written, so that executive leaders can dive into them, extract wisdom, understand it through stories, and then have ways to apply it in their own professional life. And I would encourage people to check them out. I'm sure that there's a lot of wisdom and very, very tightly packaged and easy to understand, digest, and implement. So I definitely encourage that. And you mentioned earlier that you have innovated and you've incorporated AI into your coaching practice now. Can you tell the friends and family how they can bring a new friend into their professional lives?
I really want everyone to just get as much feedback as they possibly can. And I thought that it would be fun to provide a free way for people to, dabble in getting some feedback. So if you go to www.feedbackfriend.ai, all you have to do is put in the email addresses of 4 to 14 people, and it will send them, a survey for them to fill out. And then you will receive a report of your top 5 positive themes and your top 5 potential suggestions and areas. And I recommend people do it. It's very fun. You just have to, people just have to be willing to participate. And
who
really
should they ask
insightful.
For the feedback? Is this professional colleagues, friends, family, all of the above?
It can be whatever they want. I think I would recommend that you don't mix it too much. So if you're going to do a professional one, you can, but it might be a little bit less, easy to understand where to action. I mean, you're one person, so behaviors typically cross over, but it's kind of nice. So I would recommend, if you want to do a friends and family, like sort of what's my impact in my kind of community, and then, a professional one. And that professional one can also include clients and suppliers. I mean, oftentimes it's nice to get a few different angles. And then I have had a number of executive teams that do it with each other. So they each do each other with their peers, and then they each get a little report and they debrief sort of what they learned from that. So, I mean, there's lots of different ways to use it, but it's yielding some really great results for people. So I'm really excited.
That's fantastic. It sounds like a fun and innovative and easy way for people to dive in and collect a lot of feedback from people in their lives. And I see your sign there in the background. I want to get just a little bit more background regarding your firm, Leaderly, Ley. I looked up Leaderly, Ly, in the dictionary, and all it said was befitting a leader. That wasn't very helpful. What does it mean to be leaderly? And if I'm an executive who really wants to engage with Marisa Murray in a meaningful way, how would I do that?
Yeah, so my definition of, I think that leaderly is the highest compliment. I believe that your journey to your best leader is your journey to your best career, being the best spouse, being the best parent, being the best human. And I think it all is about nurturing that sense of leadership within ourselves. So to me, Leaderly is the highest compliment. At Leaderly, we offer leadership development, executive and team development, as well as one-on-one coaching. And everything that we do is with the spirit of recognizing that it's extraordinary leaders that drive superior results.
That's fantastic. And website, or where would they find you most easily?
www.leaderly.com. Yeah.
Ley.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, to conclude today, one of our many blind spots, at least in the eyes of our children as parents, is humor. We here at Dadages like to celebrate bad dad jokes, bad parental humor in general. Before we get going, can you share your best, worst parent joke?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was fun to think of because I think my dad told me this joke like 100 times.
Oh, that's even better. I love that.
So the joke is, what do boys and buses have in common?
I don't know.
Another one will come along soon.
Ah, I see.
And I got told this joke every time I had heartbreak, or the boy that I liked didn't like me, or I broke up with a boy, or, this joke. And I was one of 5 girls. So I heard this joke to all my sisters. It was his version of compassion for our heartbreak.
Your father's go-to advice was boys and buses. I love it. Well, that's a great place to wrap up this episode of Dadages. Marisa, it's been very fun and very educational, both engaging with you through reading your book and having you here today with us in the studio and the rest of the Dadages friends and family. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom, and thank you for spending time with us today.
No, it was wonderful, Chad. Thank you so much. And thank you for the work you do.
Well, thank you. And before we go, I'll remind the Dadages friends and family, remember, Dad may not always know what he's talking about, but he sure can sound like he does.